Well, how about the next phase? Say like 9 to 15. What do you got for someone at that age?
Just pray. That stage, oh my goodness. I swear, that stage is given to us to grow us as parents more than it is to grow the children. Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, but you meant financially. How do we do?
How do we continue to disciple them in their stewardship?
Okay. No, I of course am kidding, but I have all girls, and so yeah, that is quite the stage for me. I think that with that one, you start to get a little bit closer to being able to monetize things around the house.
Welcome to the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino Villa. Christ Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino Villa.
Maria, you have a recent college grad in the workforce, and my 16-year-old daughter just got her first job for the summer. So I thought it would be a great time to have a conversation about how we progressively disciple our children into stewardship, because we also both have children who are not yet in the workforce, but that doesn't mean we're not teaching them how to steward things well.
Awesome.
So I want to start by just kind of sharing a little bit of background. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your recent college grad and what she's doing and how it is that she's stewarding what she's making in the workforce nowadays?
Sure. Well, she just graduated with a bachelor's in forensic science, but as part of our attempt to not have as many costs. I was going to say student loans, but we do have a couple of those, but just costs in general. She worked really hard to graduate in 3.5 years rather than a full 4. And unfortunately, that took away her ability to do an internship, which we didn't really pursue during the time. Now looking back, it's something that we're doing differently with our second daughter, because I share that because finding a job in her specific field has proven to be quite difficult with not having that internship. And so she has continually put in for that, which is great. And she will continue to do that. But in the meantime, she's like, I'm actually needing to have some sort of income here. So she's actually just working at Panera. That's where she's
Mm.
working right now, which is fine. It's absolutely fine. It's all of the work habits that are important. She's usually opens up. So she's been leaving the house at 4:30 in the morning to open at 5, and has been putting in probably anywhere from 25 to 35 hours a week. And so it's mimicking a full-time job for her, which is also important. And it's bringing in a more consistent paycheck, which is something that she's not really used to. And so we are starting to really put into practice some of those things that we've been teaching her along the way, and not just here's one big chunk that you have to save for, but there's other things that you're going to have to take into consideration as well.
So yeah, what are some of those lessons at that stage? Early 20s, kind of just new to it, like you said, new to a more consistent and predictable income. Uh, so what are some of the lessons that you're sharing with her now?
Well, some of the practical lessons are just what are some of the expenses that are out there. So things like rent. She doesn't have a specific rent, but we had told her that when June 1st hits, we are going to be charging her rent for staying here. We gave her a full semester off because she did keep that semester out of our pockets as well. And so we said, we'll give that grace to you and then we'll start charging rent. It will be a lower rent than typical because because we don't need the money from her, but it's really just to help get into that practice. Things like car insurance and cell
Mhm.
phones and things that, we do not need to provide for her. Health insurance, things that are connected to us because just by default, but things that are available, not available, things that are necessary for her to be able to use later on, and we don't want it to just smack her in the face and go, "Oh, we had that." But there's also the mental piece of it that I've noticed we're having to start to really help her recognize. And you and I talk sometimes about the mental scripts that we have, the financial
Mhm.
scripts. And one thing that I've really noticed with her recently is when I'll say, this thing has to be done, or, yes, if you would like to have that, you may have it as long as it's worth your $20, not my $20, right? Her default is, but I don't have money. That I don't have money. I don't have money. And I think it's really interesting because she has money. Sometimes it feels like she has more than we do because she doesn't have all of the obligations that we also have.
Right.
And I think that there has been it's probably twofold. One, she probably has heard us say, "We don't have money." We
Mhm.
typically will finish that statement with, "We don't have money for that," because it's one of those things that I'm actually trying very hard to be very, intentional with, and not say, "We don't have money, we don't have money, we don't have money," but to say, "We don't have money for that. We're choosing to put our money somewhere else," right?
Mm.
But I obviously she's heard that, but I think she's also repeated that over and over and over in her college years because, there's that whole idea that college kids don't have money, or maybe she really didn't have specific money for those things, and she had a job during college, but it was a much smaller job, right? She didn't have as many hours. And so and most of her money was going towards paying for school. And
Mm.
so, and at that time, she probably didn't really feel like she had money. But I'm noticing now, that that script continues to play over and over for her, and that it becomes her default script. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to work really hard with her now on is rewriting that script and not assuming that she doesn't have money for anything.
Yeah, no, what a great opportunity to do that early, right? Before years go down the road and it affects because we talk so often about how our thoughts and our beliefs trigger our emotions, those emotions drive our behaviors, and so before it has an opportunity to do that for years and years in a negative way, great to just kind of jump on that now. I know for me, I recently had a conversation with my 16-year-old daughter who just got her first job, and which kind of inspired this conversation today. Because as I had that conversation with her, I was just floored by how ready she was to have the conversation. What do I mean by that? After her first shift, before she even got her first paycheck, we were talking in the car. And I said, "Hey, when you get paid, we're going to sit down." And she's like, "I know. And we're going to talk about giving, saving, investing, and spending." And I was like, okay. Right? Like, she knows what the conversation is going to include. She got paid just this past Friday. So we did sit down and we looked at those four categories. We looked at giving and saving, investing, and spending. And then she had really great questions about the difference between saving and investing. She happens to be in an economics class right now where they're talking about it. And she's like, one of the questions was, which is more important, saving or investing? So she wanted to kind of get my perspective. And so we just started talking about it. And I said, look, right now you have a savings account that's a high yield savings account. It's paying you 3.1% currently. I said, so imagine you had $1,000 in there. At the end of the year, making 3.1%, how much money would you have made? She does the calculation. She's like $31. Okay. Now, let's look at over the last 12 months, how has the S&P 500 performed? So if you had that $1,000 in investing, what might it look like? And over the last 12 months, it's been up like 24 point something percent. So I had her do the calculation. She's like, I would have made $240. She's like, investing's more important. I was like, yes, bud. And she's like, but there's risk because I could lose it. And I'm like, I'm just elated that she knows this stuff, and now there's an opportunity to apply it. Because I think, to your point, it's all theoretical when there's no money to actually manage. And
Yep.
so, yeah, you can have the conversations about like what's important and what you should be thinking about. And apparently those conversations are pretty important because they'll drive the conversation once money does arrive, as it
Mhm.
did with my daughter. But just being able to have that conversation, we went on to talk about how much do you save before you kind of stop saving and you put the rest in investments. Because right at the beginning, she's like, okay, I know that I'm saving 10% of every dollar that I make. She's like, until when? And I said, well, some people save what they call either an emergency fund. We call it a peace of mind fund. And apparently in economics, they were talking about this. She's like, right, so that you have peace of mind when something comes up and you can just kind of take care of it. I'm like, that's awesome. So I'm like, how much do you need to have before you have kind of too much? And so we were talking about like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And it's like after $20,000, if you were investing the rest, she's like, oh, and if something was big enough that it really wiped out your savings, you could just take it from your investments. I got to tell you, Maria, I was like over the moon with the level of maturity and preparation she seemed to have.
As long as it's not a retirement investment, in which case she can't.
Right. Yeah. And we didn't go down that, but like right now,
Yeah.
her investment is in just a brokerage account.
Mhm.
So she knows like there is some liquidity there. She can get her hands on it if need be.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing right there. It just even giving them a sense of understanding the vocabulary around
Yes.
all of it. So, the idea of liquidity, like, what does that even mean? Does it mean money spilling out all over? Like, what does that? What does that mean? But I think that is one of the biggest. I think one of the biggest foibles that not just parents, but even coaches and personal finance gurus that they make that mistake of not they just focus so much on here are the tips, here's what you should be doing, and don't take the time to slow down and help them, whether they're kids or young adults or even aged adults who just haven't had the experience to really understand the grammar around what it is that we're talking about. And so I think that that's one thing that is beautiful that you're able to say, okay, here is what liquidity means, here's what investment means. And I would take it even one step further and ask, investing in what? What does
Mhm.
investing mean? Are you investing in yourself? Are you investing in just this S&P 500? Or is there a specific company that you're trying to invest in? And when you invest in those companies, are they companies that align with your values, right? So it's just starting to
Yeah,
really get them to think about that. And I think those are all things that we can do even before the first paycheck comes in.
absolutely. And that's really why I wanted to have the conversation. That, and there was a post to a Facebook group where Todd had asked, my daughter's 14. Do any of you have your kids help with the budget? He goes on to say, my wife is concerned that she, the daughter, might get anxious if she helps and knows how much money they're making and where their money is going. And he goes on to clarify that he just means observe, right? Kind of help out with the numbers. And the moment I saw this, I was like thinking about how at 6, 7, 8 years old, Christopher would sit on my lap and he would be, plugging in the numbers in the spreadsheet as I was doing the monthly budget. And he
Mhm.
would come and he'd be like, Dad, is it time to do the budget? So, absolutely. The easy answer is absolutely. Get your kids involved. Get them involved early, get them involved often. But the deeper question might be, well, what's age appropriate? And how do I disciple my child up for the age that they are? And how can I just build some foundational blocks so that when my 16-year-old is ready to get her first paycheck, she's talking to me about how she's going to give, save, invest, and spend.
Yeah.
And so that's how I wanted to kind of spend the balance of our time, is just talking about different age groupings and some of the stewardship conversations you could be having with that age group to set the foundation.
Okay. I'm here for it. And, God provided an entire span of ages for me. And so, maybe it was just for this particular conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to want to pick your brain and also share what I've done at different age groupings. But let's start off with young ones. You might have. I know your youngest is currently 7. Correct me if I'm wrong.
She is impressive.
Okay. So she's not in the 3 to 5 age group, but she recently was in the 3 to 5 age group. And when you think about a 3 to 5 year old, what's some of the stewardship conversations we could be having with a child so young?
Well, I think that modeling is going to be one of the best things we can do for our little ones that's small. Um, they can see when we are putting money in a basket at church or when we are giving tips to our servers at restaurants. They can watch when we are praying to God about what we do with this, whether it's a windfall of money or when we are struggling, like we don't have enough to seem to go around for that particular day. They get to watch all of that stuff. And so I think when we're modeling that for them, it creates questions because kids are just naturally curious and they have these questions about why did you do that and what's that and can you tell me more about that, and then again just kind of giving them some of the definitions around things. I know that sounds so weird, but it's like they're actually wanting to know, and so this is an opportunity to share that with them. And so I think that's one way that we can absolutely do that. What's another way you have?
Well, before I share mine, I love the expression more is caught than taught.
Mm-hmm.
So when
For
you say
sure.
modeling, right, they're going to see how it is that we show up in certain situations. And so the more we can be mindful about that and intentional with those opportunities, I think that's a great thing. For me, that that young, I think 2 things that I'm focused on with the kids when they're that young is, 1, gratitude. Being grateful for the things that you have, right? Gratitude kind of just sets a foundation of things like giving. Like, if I'm grateful for what I have, it is going to be easier for me to give away some of what I have because I'm just grateful that I have my needs met. So, there's gratitude. And the other is delayed gratification, waiting, being able
Mm-hmm.
to say, not right now. Right? It's not that it's a no, it's
Yeah.
a not right now. And I think for littles, those are 2 things that are really easy to focus on and help them find those opportunities and those times where, hey, let's I love at Thanksgiving to go around the table, like, what are you grateful for? Right. And so it's like, hey, let's express gratitude right now. As you were saying, like, as they're watching, as you're modeling, and maybe you're tipping, and you're tipping a gratuity because you're expressing gratitude, it's an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to just bring that into the conversation. Hey, we're really pleased and happy with the service that we were provided, and so we want to show our gratitude through generosity.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, so then how about the age group that your youngest is in, that 6 to 8 year old? What how do we steward up our child, or how do we disciple up our child in stewardship at that age?
Well, I think it's starting with the stuff that you just mentioned, and then building upon some of that. I have just a cute little anecdote, if I may.
Of
We
course.
actually did go to lunch yesterday after church, and my little one, she was so cute. She brought along her little coin purse, and she told me, "Mom, I want to give this to our server." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great," and she pulled out a quarter, and she was so insistent, because in my mind, I'm like, I don't want this person to think that we're insulting them because we're leaving a quarter.
Yeah.
so, I was trying to think like, how do I do that without breaking her little spirit? And let's just see how this plays out. It was so cute. He brought waters for everybody, and she said, "Mom, I want to give this to him. I want to give it to him." And it did not leave her mind. And so finally I told this gentleman, I said, my daughter would like to give this to you. I said, I just don't want you to think that that's all you're getting. And he was so pleased. And then he actually said, would you like to order first? Because, and so she did. It was really cute. And I needed that reminder that that was generous for her, right? It was just her tiny little thing. And he wasn't going to be offended by that because he knew it was
Mhm.
coming from her, not from us. But it was just kind of cute to see her do that in action. And it was completely certainly we did not start it. So I know that was pretty cute. Okay, so I think that in this age, we're building on that foundation, and this is where we can start to have more of the conversations around decision making. So, you
Mhm.
mentioned expressing the delayed gratification. This is a really a good opportunity to help them to make those decisions. How do we choose between this versus this? If I am given a limit of something, whether it's their money or our money, then I am sitting there looking at this toy versus this toy. This one is a little bit more, this one's a little bit less. Maybe I have enough for both, but chances are I don't. And so now I have to choose which one do I want instead. And that has been really interesting to watch with all of the kids because it makes them have to make those decisions. And it reminds me as a mom and as a wife and as just a regular old steward in the world that I too have to make those decisions. And there might
Mhm.
be times when there is enough money, but is there enough money for later on? I have another story that I'll share much later as we get into some of the
Mhm.
older things, but I think that that is one of the next levels for, at least for me. What do you got?
Yeah, so I think having conversations about the trade-offs, as you're pointing out, and having conversations about the difference between spending every dollar that you get and being able to save some of that for future self, I think
Yeah.
are some of the conversations that are age appropriate for a 6 to 8 year old. And as I said, I had Christopher sit on my lap, and he was helping kind of type in the numbers, and I would share with him what he was doing. Right, if we went to the bank to pay the mortgage, I would start to explain what a mortgage is to a 6 to 8 year old.
Hmm.
I have long believed that we could challenge our children to know and understand things to a greater degree than what we think. For instance, side note, like I started both kids on like reading programs when they were 18 months old, so that by the time that they went to preschool, that like they could read already. So the same thing when I have my 6, 7, or 8 year old son in my lap doing the budget with me, and I start to explain what a mortgage is. I don't necessarily expect him to completely understand the concept 100%, but being able to reiterate that I had to borrow money from the bank to buy this house that we're in. And so now I have to pay the bank back for giving us the money up front. And just being able to have a simple conversation. So I think part of it is terminology, and as you had mentioned before, right? Being able to introduce the vocabulary, introduce these terms so they're not foreign by the time they're meaningful. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't know that I knew what a mortgage was until I was probably in my 20s. I didn't really have a concept of that. But now, if my children have a better concept of rent versus mortgage and that sort of thing, by the time they're 20, they're not hearing it for the first time. They're already steeped in, I know what that is. I know what that looks like.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just using language like ours versus not ours. And,
Mm,
we in especially in Christ-centered stewardship talk about how nothing is ours. It's all God's and it's given to us to steward. But even if you take that one step lower and just say, like this house is not ours, it does not belong to us. We are
mm,
needing to steward it, of course, but if push comes to shove, when we can't pay for it, it's not ours. Like it belongs to a bank. And so same thing, like if you have a car payment, that the car is not yours. And then when you don't have that car payment anymore and you own a title, then you can say this car belongs to us. Like it actually, and it sounds silly, but
No.
we did have a car payment at one point with our littlest one, and we no longer have it. But it was so funny because one day she said, and she was using this in a snarky little way because she can be that way. But I was telling her that, we need to clean up the car because it's something that belongs to us and we need to steward well. And she's like, but it's not ours. I said, "Au contraire, it is because we had paid it by then." And it was just so funny that like she obviously has picked up on that language, and she,
Yeah.
they're hearing us and they're actually paying attention. So shame on me for not sharing with her when that was paid off and that this is now ours. So, we learn as we go.
Absolutely. Well, how about the next phase? Say like 9 to 15. You got that preteen entering into teenage years. What do you got for someone at that age?
Just pray. That stage, oh my goodness. I swear, that stage is given to us to grow us as parents more than it is to grow the children. Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, but you meant financially. How do we do?
How do we continue to disciple them in their stewardship?
Okay. No, I of course am kidding. But I have all girls, and so yeah, that is quite the stage for for me. I think that with that, when you start to get a little bit closer to, being able to monetize things around the house, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you can not necessarily pay them for the things that they ought to do anyway, just because they're part of the family. But you can start to add monetary incentives to certain things that they can do. And then that gives them the opportunity to understand, oh, how I actually do something and I'm able to get paid for that. And then what do I do with that money later on? And I think that this is a really good opportunity to start introducing technology, if you will, if that's the right word there, that they will be exposed to in adulthood. So, for example, not just having cash on hand all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but also being willing to get one of those free debit cards so that they
Yeah.
understand that what that swipe looks like and how to then see on the other side what happened. Money was there and now it's not there anymore. What took place when I touched that thing or swiped it or however it works?
Yeah.
Because they need to be prepared for what's actually coming later on. I don't think it's fair to, especially because you gave me a wide range, 9 to 15 is kind of a wide range, but I don't think it's fair for us to say, well, you can only use cash. And so you can feel the difference when we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that is not all that they're going to be exposed to. And so I think giving them the opportunity to really experience that when it's nice and safe within our boundaries is important.
Absolutely. Not only do I think you can incentivize and start to compensate them for jobs done around the house, like you said, not the ones that need to be done, like cleaning your room. You're going to clean your room because you live in the house and we're going to keep a tidy house. That's it.
Yeah.
But maybe you want to do something above and beyond and get paid for it. I know that a number of times as a family have had like a garage sale, the kids took it upon themselves they wanted to buy like candy bars and waters and whatnot so that they could sell
Hmm.
while we were doing the garage sale. And so even an opportunity to be entrepreneurial, an opportunity to be entrepreneurial in that moment led to obviously lessons, like you said, about now that you have these revenues that you've made in cash and actually even setting them up electronically with like Venmo so that they had to manage both of those things. They're managing
Hmm.
cash, they're managing the electronic. Absolutely, a great opportunity to get them involved in that. I know for my wife and I, we actually put both children on a credit card and got a credit card in with their name on it. And my son, who is currently 12 years old, has been paying for his own haircuts using the credit card because I wanted him getting used to, like, what does that look like? But then there's also a gratuity there. So there's
Hmm.
there's additional responsibility that you can safely offload while you're also monitoring with your children. So he doesn't go and get a haircut by himself. We're always there together, but he wraps up about 5 to 10 minutes earlier than I do. So I have prepared him with the credit card. He goes up, he pays and provides gratuity all on his own, getting him used to how that technology works, but just also how that interaction works, where I've I've received a service. I need now to pay for that service. I also need to express my gratitude for a job well done through the gratuity. So lots of opportunity to give them ownership over some of those things.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great, great example. In this area, this range is where I'm going to share that other story. And it's a little bit of a heavier story, but I just want to share it so that people know like these lessons really do start to sink in for kids. So, right around the time that my two oldest ones were in this 9 to 15-year-old range is when something had happened tragically with one of our pets. And it was to where it was the younger pet, and he had chewed on something that got wrapped around his intestine. And so, long story short, they were faced with having to decide whether or not to try to do surgery on the dog or to put him down. And I say it was my kids because I had to stay home with the two younger girls, and then my husband took my two older ones to the emergency vet. And it was in that moment that it was the two kids who really ended up making the decision to put him down. But part of the discussion around it was, I'm guessing it was like $7,500 or something stupid for the surgery. And we had to have the discussion about, if anything were to happen to them, to our children,
Mm.
we absolutely would not even think twice about spending $7,500 on them. But we had to think twice about it with an animal so that if something were to happen to them the next day, we would have that money for them because we had it, but if we had spent it, we would not have it. We didn't have this endless amount of money that we could spend on
Right.
emergency things, right? And so they ultimately, my husband, he didn't burden them with that decision, but he empowered them with that ability to make that decision, and they did a beautiful job with it. I was so proud of how they came to the conclusion that they did,
Mm.
and here we are all these years later, and they're seeing how that decision really did make a difference in their lives, and they have the other pet still, they know that something that was a little bit less money or, and that they figured out how to ask questions like, is it really necessary to do this thing over here? Is there another way to do it? And they've watched me with that process, and then
Mhm.
been able to use it themselves. So just wanted to share that little one because is as heavy as a topic as that can be, and that decision was very heavy. They actually had the maturity available to do it, but it didn't have to do with their money per se, but it allowed them to make that decision even with our money.
Mm. Again, the intentionality, right? Just the opportunity to take a situation and be intentional through it, makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
All right. And so now we kind of move into that 16 to 18-year-old. Like now they probably have an opportunity to get their first real job and by real I just mean they're out there, W-2, working for
Mhm.
somebody else, that sort of thing. What are some of the stewardship lessons at that age?
Well, I think that it continues along the path that we've started to lay. It just gets a little bit more complicated. So when we are looking at some of I use the word grammar because that's what we do in our schooling.
Mm,
But I think you use the word terminology, which is probably more acceptable for our listeners. So you start to expose them to more of the terminology. You mentioned W-2. Well, W-2 means that we get to talk about taxes now. And so, like,
yeah.
what does that really mean? And at what point do you need to actually do that? And, it's so interesting because with our first and second, as they started going through the W-2 stuff, that got me starting to research at what level of earnings do they even need to claim taxes, right? Do they need to
Hmm.
claim income? And here in Arizona, I think back then it was 10 or 11. I think now it's up to like 13,000 or something a year that they can make without having to even pay any income tax. And so that was necessary for us to know so that when they're filling out the W-2, we can fill that out properly. So it's just kind of walking them through the steps of those things and not just doing it for them. I think that is something that is really tempting for a lot of parents, is just,
Hmm.
you know what? It's complicated. Let me just do that for you. And to your point earlier, it's like they're actually quite capable of a lot of things, even when they're very young. Even sometimes it's like even more so when they're young and they're afraid their
Mm,
brains are just so open to so many things. But they are capable of this, and it does take longer. And I think that that's where it becomes a stewardship thing for us, right? So as parents, as we're called to steward our children well, I do believe that it can be a lot more time consuming to teach our children the way to do something. I mean, something as simple as the dishwasher, or washing
hmm.
dishes. It's so funny when my husband, he's like, boy, like when this is many years ago. Oh, I see that, you say you've been working on this house all day. What happened? I'm like, it's been cleaned up 4 times. And now the fifth one, I just didn't get to do it. But the reality is it takes longer to have your children help you with things because they don't do the job that you would do, right? So it will take longer. So if you're sitting down with them in order to do a W-2 fill out, that's going to take a lot longer than you just doing it yourself. So if you're sitting, this happens oftentimes too. If they're in school, like my second one is now still in college. I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had on the phone where it's like, here's the document that I was given. Can you help walk through what this needs to do? And that takes a lot longer, especially when you're not in front of them and you have to figure out, okay, tell me what this says and all of that.
Hmm.
But it's important because we could do it all. But then what? Then when they're 30 and 40 and 50, you're still going to be doing it all for them? Like
Yeah.
that's not useful, you know? So
Yeah.
I think that this is that age where we really start to pass the baton and have them do a lot more of it.
Yeah. Allow the conceptual to become more concrete.
Yeah,
You
well
talk
stated.
about taxes and so the same thing. My daughter just had to fill out all of her onboarding paperwork, which included like how much is she going to have withheld for taxes and all those things. And I said, at the end of the day, you're probably not going to make enough where you're actually going to need to pay into taxes, but we are going to have them take out taxes so that when we do a tax filing, you will get a refund and you'll see how that process works as well. And just to get used to the idea that you don't get to bring home every dollar that you make, right? Uncle Sam is going to want his cut. So giving her that opportunity to make the conceptual concrete by doing these things on her own. As you said, it is often faster for us to do it for them, but that is not setting them up for success. I am so encouraged by how my daughter's getting started that I can only imagine 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, she will just have a command and a stewardship over these things unlike anything I could have imagined for myself at that age,
Hmm.
right? And so allow all of these different concepts, continue to use terminology, continue to explain it, continue to let them make more and more of those decisions. For instance, I'll wrap up with this story from this past weekend as my daughter got her first check. She wanted to celebrate by buying her very own sushi rolls. She's like, I want sushi. And after we did the um, giving, saving, investing, and this is how much you have left to spend, it was like, how much do you want to set aside to spend on things like food between now and your next pay period? And she's like, I want to set aside $50 of the money that I have left over to do that. And I said, okay, well, and you want to celebrate with sushi tonight? And I was like, sushi's kind of expensive. So we looked at it. She's like, show me the menu. She looked and she's all like, okay, I want this roll and this roll. She's like, okay, that's going to be like $23. Then she came to the realization that, okay, that's 23 of the $50 that I'm setting aside for a 2-week period. But, she's making that decision. She's calculating the trade-offs. Like, do I want to celebrate this way right now? Because for the next 2 weeks, I'm not really going to be doing anything but working anyway, as school is coming up to an end and all that stuff. And then the last part of that was she had some cash on hand, but her paycheck was also direct deposited. So it was, do you want to pay this time with cash, or do you want to pay with a credit card? Because remember, my wife and I have put them on credit cards. They have their own name. Do you want to put it on the credit card and then make a credit card payment immediately afterwards? And she's like, I want to put it on the credit card and then I'll make the payment. So I went to pick it up for her. I paid with the credit card. When I got back, we opened up the app and she made a payment to the credit card from her checking account to give her more exposure about how these things really work. So let the conceptual become concrete by giving them more and more of the responsibility, but guide them, right? Provide for them a safe to fail environment where it's like, I'm right here with you and I'm not going to allow you to make some huge blunder. But at the same time, you want to spend $23 of your 50 right now today. I'm going to let you do that because you have to learn for yourself.
That's right. That's right. And that really is the best teacher. So you're doing a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So our challenge to our listeners this week, have one age-appropriate conversation with your child about stewardship this week. And whether that's spending, saving, giving, gratitude, work, contentment, whatever category is age-appropriate for your child. But then I also want you to reflect honestly and ask yourself, am I modeling the values I'm teaching?
Challenge accepted, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.